The millionaire's fingers tightened around the edges of his phone as he watched the live camera feed in disbelief. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't possible. There was no logical explanation for what he was seeing. On the screen, his frail, sickly son sat up in bed, something he hadn't done in weeks. His tiny hands clutched the sheets, his face pale, his eyes locked on something just beyond the camera's view. And then, as if obeying an unheard command, he whispered, "I know who you are." The nanny stood nearby, her expression calm. Too calm. The way she tilted her head, the way she smiled, it was unnatural. The child was sick, barely able to move most days, yet now he was sitting, speaking in a voice that didn't sound entirely like his own. The millionaire felt his blood run cold. He had hired this nanny with the best of intentions. His son needed constant care, and despite all the medical advancements money could buy, nothing had improved his condition. The doctors had told him there was no cure, no hope of recovery. And yet, there was something about this nanny. Something different. From the moment she entered the house, the atmosphere had changed. His son had started behaving strangely, sometimes better, sometimes worse. At first, the millionaire had dismissed it as coincidence. But then the nightmares began. At night, his son would wake up screaming. He would clutch at the air, crying, "They're here. They're watching." The nanny would rush in, place her hands on the boy's forehead, and suddenly, just like that, he would fall silent. Asleep again. Peaceful. Too peaceful. The millionaire's gut told him something wasn't right. He wasn't the kind of man to believe in things he couldn't explain. He built his fortune on logic, strategy, and control. But this? This was something else. And that's why he installed the cameras. Now, watching the live footage, he wished he hadn't. Because what he saw next would change everything. His son slowly turned his head, looking directly at the camera, at him. And with a small, knowing smile, the boy whispered, "Daddy, she's not what she seems." The nanny's head snapped toward the camera. And then, the feed cut to black. The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. The screen had gone dark. His hands, usually steady and controlled, trembled as he tapped the screen, refreshing the camera feed. Nothing. Black. The room was offline. His heart pounded against his ribs. It was impossible. The cameras were state-of-the-art, wired to a private, secured system. No one, not even the nanny, should have been able to disable them. Unless. He shot up from his chair, knocking it over as he rushed toward his son's bedroom. His footsteps echoed in the long hallway, the air suddenly heavy, suffocating. Something was wrong. He could feel it in his bones. As he neared the door, he hesitated. What was he about to walk into? He gritted his teeth and twisted the handle. The door creaked open, revealing an unsettling sight. His son was asleep. Peaceful. Too peaceful. The boy, who had been awake just moments ago, talking, smiling, was now unconscious, his chest rising and falling in slow, unnatural rhythms. The room felt off, colder than before. And then, there was the nanny. She stood by the bed, her back to him, perfectly still. Too still. She wasn't startled by his sudden entrance. She didn't turn around in shock or confusion. She simply stood there. Silent. Waiting. Something about the way she held herself sent a chill through him. Clearing his throat, he forced his voice to remain steady. What happened? The nanny slowly turned her head, her expression calm, unreadable. He's sleeping, she said, her voice smooth. Just like before. The millionaire narrowed his eyes. No. Not just like before. He was awake. He spoke to me. He saw me watching. The nanny tilted her head. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. Did he? A wave of unease crashed over him. Don't play games with me. He stepped closer, staring her down. What did you do? The nanny sighed, shaking her head as if he was a foolish child. I did nothing. She turned her gaze to the sleeping boy, her expression softening. But you must understand, your son is very special. His blood turned to ice. Special, he echoed. What do you mean? She exhaled slowly, as if debating whether to answer. There are things in this world beyond money, beyond medicine, beyond what you choose to believe. Your son, he is not just sick. He is connected. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. Connected? To what? The nanny's eyes met his. To them. A heavy silence settled in the room. The millionaire clenched his fists. You're talking nonsense. My son is sick. That's it. She shook her head. No. He is not just sick. He is being pulled. And if you don't act soon, she trailed off, her gaze shifting toward the sleeping child. You may lose him forever. A cold shiver ran down his spine. For the first time in his life, the millionaire, who built his empire on logic, facts, and control, felt completely powerless. Because deep down, beneath all his doubt and skepticism, a small, terrifying voice whispered. What if she's right? The millionaire clenched his jaw, his mind racing. Pulled? What did she mean? His son was sick, there was no supernatural force at play, no unseen entity. This was nonsense. It had to be. And yet. His eyes flickered back to his son. The boy lay still, his breathing unnaturally slow, his lips parted just slightly. His skin, already pale, looked almost translucent under the dim light. Something was very, very wrong. He turned back to the nanny. Enough with the riddles. If there's something you know about my son, you better tell me now. The nanny studied him for a moment before stepping forward, her expression unreadable. You've been watching the cameras, haven't you? His muscles tensed. Yes. And I saw something. Something that shouldn't be possible. The corner of her lips twitched into the faintest hint of a smile. Then you already know the truth. You just don't want to accept it. His fists tightened. I don't have time for games. Neither do I. She took another step forward. You're not the only one watching. His breath caught. What? She turned her gaze toward the dark corners of the room. They know you've seen them now. A chill ran down his spine. A long, eerie silence settled between them. The room felt heavier than before, as if the very air had thickened. The millionaire's instincts screamed at him to leave, to walk out the door and never look back. But then his son stirred. The boy's lips moved, barely a whisper. They're coming. The nanny stiffened. The millionaire lunged forward, grabbing his son's hand. Who's coming? What are you talking about? The boy's eyelids fluttered, but his eyes didn't open. His small fingers curled around his father's wrist with a grip that was shockingly strong. They don't want you here. A sharp bang echoed through the room, making the millionaire jump. He spun around. The closet door had slammed shut on its own. His heart hammered. No windows were open. No draft. No explanation. He turned to the nanny, demanding answers. What the hell is happening? Her face was unreadable. But he saw it, a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear? Or something else? You should leave, she said softly. Before it's too late. His hands shook. He had never been the kind of man to fear the unknown. But in that moment, standing in that room with his unconscious son and a nanny who seemed to know too much, For the first time in his life, the millionaire felt completely helpless. And then, the closet door creaked open. Darkness stretched beyond it. A shadow moved. Something was inside. And it was watching. The millionaire's breath turned shallow. His eyes locked onto the darkness stretching beyond the closet door. Something shifted inside. Not footsteps. Not the rustle of fabric. Something else. A presence. His pulse thundered in his ears. His body screamed at him to move, to run, to grab his son and get out of that room, but he stood frozen, his grip tightening around the boy's small hand. The nanny didn't flinch. Her face remained calm, but her posture changed, rigid, defensive. He tore his gaze away from the closet. "What is in there?" His voice was a low growl. She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow step forward, placing herself between him and the open door. His instincts roared in warning. "Step aside." The nanny ignored him. "You won't like what you find." Something about the way she said it, softly, almost regretfully, sent ice through his veins. And then, a whisper. From inside the closet. "He's ours now." The words barely registered before the millionaire lunged. He grabbed the edge of the door and yanked it open. Black. The closet was deeper than it should be, far beyond the dimensions of the house. It stretched endlessly, a hollow void where the light refused to reach. And deep within that darkness, a shape moved. 2 pinpricks of golden light flared to life, eyes, watching, waiting. A sickening chill crawled up the millionaire's spine. And then, the entire room shifted. The air grew thick, vibrating with an unseen force. The walls groaned, the temperature dropping sharply. A distant, inhuman whisper seeped into the room, not from the closet but from everywhere at once. The millionaire stumbled back, gripping his son tightly. His instincts screamed danger. "What is this?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The nanny exhaled slowly. "The truth." He turned on her, his eyes burning with rage. "What truth?" She met his gaze. "Your son isn't sick." His body went rigid. "What?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "He's being pulled between 2 worlds. He's special, more than you know. And if you don't act soon, they will take him." The words sliced through him. "His son, taken?" He shook his head. "That's impossible. This isn't real. This is some hallucination. Some. Deny it all you want." The nanny's voice was eerily soft. "But you know I'm right. You've seen the signs." A flood of memories crashed over him. The way his son had whispered to unseen things. The unexplained cold spots in the house. The footsteps he'd heard at night, just outside his son's door. And now, this. The shadow in the closet shifted again, the golden eyes unblinking. A deep, guttural chuckle filled the room. The nanny moved fast. She yanked the door shut and pressed her palm against the wood. The whispering stopped. The air in the room settled. The millionaire staggered back, his mind spinning. This was madness. He turned to her, his voice laced with desperation. "What the hell is happening to my son?" The nanny's face softened. "He's more than you think. And they know it." "Who are they?" he demanded. A pause. Then, finally, she whispered. "The ones who never left." A shiver crawled through him. For the first time in his life, the millionaire, who had built his entire existence on wealth, power, and control, felt truly powerless. And in that moment, he realized one horrifying truth. Money wouldn't save his son. But something else might. And he had no choice but to believe in it. The millionaire paced the room, his pulse hammering in his ears. None of this made sense. His son wasn't sick. He was being taken. This was nonsense. It had to be. And yet, the closet door still pulsed with an eerie energy, the air thick with something unseen, something waiting. He turned sharply to the nanny. "Start talking. Now." She exhaled slowly, as if choosing her words carefully. "Your son, he has a connection to them. To the ones beyond." His stomach twisted. "Beyond what?" She hesitated. "This world." A bitter laugh escaped him. "You expect me to believe my son is, what? Haunted?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Not haunted. Marked." A heavy silence followed. The millionaire shook his head, running a hand down his face. "This is insane." But then, a soft voice. "Daddy?" His heart stopped. He spun around. His son was awake. The boy's eyes were barely open, his voice weak. But his small fingers gripped his father's wrist tightly. "Daddy." "I heard them." The room went deathly still. The millionaire swallowed hard. "Who?" The boy's lips parted. His eyes flickered to the closet, then to the nanny. "She knows." The nanny's face darkened. The millionaire's mind reeled. "What do you mean, she knows?" His son coughed, his breathing shallow. His grip tightened. "She talks to them." A sharp coldness spread through the room. The millionaire took a step back, his eyes darting between the nanny and his son. "What is he talking about?" he demanded. The nanny didn't respond. Instead, she slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and silver. A pendant. The moment his son's eyes landed on it, his entire body tensed. And then, the boy screamed. The lights flickered. The closet door rattled violently. Something unseen roared through the air. The millionaire grabbed his son, shielding him. "What the hell is happening?" The nanny's voice was urgent. "They're trying to take him. You have to trust me." He looked at her, his mind racing. Could he? His entire life had been built on logic, money, and power. And yet, none of that mattered now. Because at this moment, in this room, the impossible was real. And it wanted his son. The millionaire's grip tightened around his son's frail body. The boy trembled, his small hands clutching at his father's shirt as if he knew, whatever was coming, it was getting closer. The nanny remained perfectly still, the silver pendant dangling from her fingers. The moment the boy saw it, his body convulsed, his eyes wide with terror. "Take it away," the child screamed. The millionaire's heart pounded. He turned to the nanny. "What is that? Why is he reacting like that?" Her face was unreadable. "Because he remembers." The words sent a shiver down his spine. "Remembers?" His son whimpered, curling against his father's chest, his breathing shallow and erratic. The nanny finally moved, kneeling beside them. Her voice softened. "I didn't take this job by accident." The millionaire's stomach dropped. "What?" She met his gaze. "I came because I knew your son was special. I've seen children like him before." His blood ran cold. "Children like him?" She nodded. "They're rare. Extremely rare. But when they appear, the others always come for them." A deep silence filled the room. The millionaire swallowed hard. "Others?" The nanny sighed, glancing at the closet door. "There are things in this world we don't understand. Beings that exist between life and death, between dimensions, between what we can see and what we can't." He stared at her, his hands trembling. "You expect me to believe my son is connected to some other world?" The nanny tilted her head. You already know it's true. You've seen it. The cameras don't lie. His mind raced back to the footage, the way his son had looked directly into the lens and whispered, "She's not what she seems," just before the feed cut to black. He wanted to deny it. Wanted to believe it was all a trick, a coincidence. But deep down, he couldn't. Because in his gut, he had felt it too. His son was changing. And something was watching. Something unnatural. The nanny held up the pendant again. This belonged to the last child who was marked. The millionaire felt ice crawl through his veins. Last? She nodded grimly. He didn't survive. A deep, guttural knocking echoed from the closet. The boy flinched. The nanny's voice dropped to a whisper. We're running out of time. The millionaire had spent his life controlling every situation, but in this moment, he had no idea what to do. The knocking from the closet grew louder. Rhythmic. Persistent. Unnatural. The millionaire's breath came fast and shallow. His son clung to him, small fingers digging into his arm. The boy's skin was ice-cold, his breathing shallow. "Daddy," the boy whimpered, barely above a whisper. "They're here." A sharp bang rattled the door. The millionaire's instincts screamed at him to run, to grab his son and leave the house. But deep inside, he knew, it wouldn't matter. Whatever was coming, wasn't bound by walls. His eyes darted to the nanny. She was already in motion, drawing a line across the floor with what looked like white powder from a small pouch. The millionaire grabbed her wrist. "What the hell is that?" Her voice was eerily calm. "A barrier." He scoffed. "You think a line of powder is going to stop whatever is in there?" She met his eyes, steady, unwavering. "Do you have a better idea?" He didn't. Another bang. The closet door rattled violently, the hinges groaning. The nanny moved fast, drawing a complete circle of the powder around the boy. "Whatever happens, don't step out of this," she warned. The millionaire's hands shook as he knelt beside his son. Then, without warning, the closet door flung open. The lights exploded in a burst of sparks. The room was plunged into near darkness, save for the eerie glow from the hallway. And then, they came. Shadows spilled from the open closet, twisting and writhing like living smoke. They crawled across the walls, stretching unnaturally, their whispering voices filling the air. The millionaire's body went rigid. The shadows had eyes. Glowing, golden, watching. A low, inhuman chuckle reverberated through the room. His son whimpered, pressing into his chest. "Daddy, don't let them take me." The millionaire's heart nearly shattered. He tightened his hold on the boy. "They won't." But how could he stop them? The nanny stepped forward, lifting the pendant high. The silver charm pulsed, sending a faint light through the darkness. The shadows shrank back. The whispers grew frantic. "You have no right," a voice hissed. The nanny's voice was firm. "He does not belong to you." A guttural growl vibrated through the air. "He was promised." The millionaire's blood ran cold. "Promised?" His son sobbed. "I don't want to go." The shadows lunged. But the moment they touched the powder line, they recoiled. The millionaire stared in shock as the shadows twisted and thrashed, unable to cross the barrier. The powder was holding. But for how long? The nanny turned to him. "You need to make a choice." His chest heaved. "What choice?" Her expression darkened. "Your son was marked before he was even born. There is only one way to break that mark." His pulse thundered. "How?" The shadows hissed, slamming against the unseen barrier. The room shook. The nanny's voice was low, urgent. You have to let go of everything you believe. If you want to save your son, you have to give them something else. The millionaire's mouth went dry. What do you mean? She turned to the shadows. A trade. The millionaire's stomach dropped. A trade? With them? Her jaw tightened. It's the only way. The shadows swarmed, their golden eyes burning. Waiting. Watching. Ready to take what was theirs. The millionaire's grip on his son tightened. His entire life had been about power, control, making the right decisions. But this was unlike anything he had ever faced. And if he made the wrong choice now, he would lose his son forever. The millionaire's heart pounded in his chest. His arms tightened around his son, who trembled against him, barely breathing. The shadows swirled wildly around the room, their golden eyes burning in the darkness. The whispering grew louder. Give him to us. The words sent ice through his veins. The nanny turned to him, her face grim. You have to decide. Now. His mind raced. A trade? What did that even mean? What could he possibly give them? He shook his head. No. I don't make deals with monsters. The shadows hissed, their voices merging into something almost amused. Then you will lose him. His son whimpered in his arms. Daddy, don't let them take me. Panic clawed at his chest. He had spent his life building an empire, making choices that always led to his success. But now? Now, he was helpless. No amount of money or power could fix this. He turned to the nanny. What do they want? Her voice was quiet. A life. The room shook. His stomach dropped. What? Her eyes met his. A life for a life. That is how their deals work. The millionaire's breath caught. He looked down at his son, frail and terrified in his arms. His life, for his son's? His throat went dry. The shadows crept closer, pressing against the unseen barrier of the powder. Waiting. Watching. The whispering changed. Or another. A sick realization hit him. They weren't just offering to take his life. They would accept any life. His pulse thundered. A new option lay before him, a terrible one. Could he? Could he give them someone else? His mind raced. He had enemies. Rivals. People who had crossed him in business. People who, maybe, deserved this more than his innocent child. The shadows must have sensed his hesitation. They slithered forward, their voices softer now, almost coaxing. It doesn't have to be you. The nanny stiffened. The millionaire felt a cold sweat trickle down his neck. His entire life had been built on deals. Trades. Power. What was one more? His son shivered in his arms, his tiny fingers gripping him weakly. The millionaire couldn't do it. Not like this. He lifted his chin, locking eyes with the burning golden orbs in the dark. Take me. The room went silent. The shadows froze. For the first time, they hesitated. Then, slowly, they whispered. Accepted. A freezing gust of wind tore through the room, and the darkness rushed forward. The millionaire squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the end. But then. A scream. Not his. Not his son's. The nanny. His eyes snapped open just in time to see her step into the swirling mass of shadows. Her face was calm, almost relieved. The shadows coiled around her, wrapping tightly, pulling her toward the open closet. The golden eyes flickered, confused, almost as if this wasn't what they had agreed to. But it was too late. The nanny smiled faintly. It was always supposed to be me. The closet slammed shut. The lights flickered back on. The air cleared. The heaviness vanished. The room was silent. The millionaire gasped for breath, his entire body shaking. He looked down, his son was breathing. His color had returned. The terrible coldness was gone. It was over. But the nanny. She was gone. The millionaire stared at the now ordinary closet door. She had saved them. But why? The answer hit him like a thunderbolt. She had known. From the very beginning, she had known she would be betrayed. She hadn't come here for a job. She had come to protect. To sacrifice. His throat tightened. He had spent his entire life believing in logic, deals, and power. But in the end, he had been saved by something far greater. A choice. A sacrifice. A human heart. The millionaire sat on the edge of his son's bed, his mind heavy with everything that had just happened. The room felt normal. The air was still. The closet door remained shut, looking no different than any other door in the house. But it was different. Because on the other side, she was gone. His son stirred beneath the blankets, his tiny fingers curling around the fabric. His breathing was steady now. Warm. Alive. It was over. But the weight in the millionaire's chest wouldn't leave. She had sacrificed herself for them. A woman he barely knew, someone he had hired as a nanny, had stepped into the darkness so his son could live. Why? He had always believed people acted in their own self-interest. That everything was a transaction. Nothing was given for free, not loyalty, not kindness, not even love. And yet, she had given everything. For a moment, he wondered, had she always known this would be her fate? Had she come into their lives knowing she would never leave? A lump formed in his throat. The nanny had been right about many things. His son wasn't just sick. He had been marked. By who? Or what? He still didn't know. And now, maybe he never would. He reached for his phone, pulling up the camera feed that had once filled him with dread. Nothing. No flickering shadows. No glowing golden eyes. Just a quiet, dimly lit room. The nightmare had passed. His son was safe. But at what cost? His fingers trembled as he exited the app. Money hadn't saved him. Power hadn't saved him. A human heart had. He looked down at his son, sleeping peacefully for the first time in months. A choice had been made. A sacrifice had been given. And now, the only question left was, how would he live knowing someone had given up their life for his son's? For the first time, the billionaire realized. All his wealth, all his success, all his careful calculations meant nothing if he didn't use them to protect, to help, to save. A knock sounded at the door. A housekeeper peeked inside, hesitating. "Sir? The new nanny applicants are waiting." He inhaled sharply. Another nanny? No. There would never be another like her. His eyes drifted toward the closet, his gut twisting with something unspoken. Would she ever come back? Was she even still alive? Or had she truly traded her soul for his son's? His jaw tightened. "Tell them to leave." The housekeeper blinked. "Sir?" His voice was firm. "No one replaces her." He stood up, brushing a hand through his son's hair. He would raise his child differently. With love. Understanding. Protection. He had been given a second chance. And this time, he wouldn't waste it.